What if I said to you, and by you, had you take this, it actually validates what I'm saying to you is that certain personalities, characters, personas, we know this to be true, are going to take statements and information in a very predictive manner. And I believe that that's what Cliff High's true power is in his, if you could say he has power at all. I mean, once you mention power with people, oh, they get bloated up, right? And I have power.
It's like, no, you don't have power. In fact, no one has any power. And that's
What I'm talking about here is that it's so obvious, and
it's like it's always going to go back into the areas of deniability.
and I think a lot of people, when I start talking about Michael Levin, they're lost. They're like, this guy's off on a trail. And it's like, no, hear me out. And it's this, quite simply, is that you are you're not self-assimilating. You're a self-supposing number unit. And when we say that, it's not abstract. It is, in fact, something that's verifiable. You can validate it. You can look at your DNA. You can take a sample of it. You can look at it under a microscope. It is more than an implication of a subset of numbers and proteins and the genomic phenomenon. But the probability and the potential of whether or not you will intermix, match, and marry between your outside environment and the inspiration from within is not only just determined by circumstance or the rerouting of this sort of meritocracy. Like when somebody gets into the areas, I've been telling you that Trump is Mussolini for a long time, and the problem is with this is that I see it as an inevitable outcome, as a process. I'm not democratic at all in the measure, but I also see that the sway is pushing people toward a truer form of socialism and democratic political maneuver, but it just shows how we are being dictated to, how we are being played by this unseen force that doesn't have to have, it uses, we value visual prompts, we value music through cathartic mechanism as noise. This entity that seems like it exists, when we want to call it demons, because we want to constantly visualize something and recreate it, right? So that we can see it. It's evil. It's got horns. It's this, that. We want to hear it as this cymatic screeching noise that is so obvious to us, and it's maybe it's a recording of sound vibrational energy from the depths of, from Sirius A or B, from the depths of space, and it's this screeching energy, and oh, that's riveting. But we're always recreating this Frankenstein's monster, and we're failing to see the scientific methodology that exists around us all the time. And that is, again, this entity, this thing exists on such a base level and is present and is there all the time. And the studies aren't looking at how people, even cancer itself, the glandular implications, the direct connection with our glands, the thing that dictates us, the way that we are really controlled, the dark aspects of who we are, when what diets do when we change the morphological function of the size and shape that we exist in, is that when we lose weight, right? When we go toward this whole Vitruvian measurements that are really brought about by the risks, and then we use the Fear 5 Fibonacci sequence, we sink in the insulin prompts, we heighten the growth hormone trials and the peaks and troughs of when we want more of that stuff, right? We manipulate the hormones by getting into this energy subset where we only allow ourselves certain constituents at certain times, certain windows, to go through an anabolic process. And after a while, going cycle by cycle through this, we end up deriving a certain shape, form, energetic function. And then once we reach that, we are going towards something. We are going towards something that exists existentially outside of us in order to reward ourselves and garner more resources. And if I were to tell you that all that is done through the prompts of what you would call a primitive quasi-consciousness that doesn't, the glands aren't manipulated through conscious thought and effort, it's the other way around. That the glands themselves are picking up on such an archaic energy that it is dictating and then chiral refraction back. And that the reason you can't see it, but you can smell it. Yeah, you can smell it, but it's not you smelling it at all. It's a murky, abstract idea, a conception, an idea, where the thing doesn't have to have a form at all. It doesn't have to have a hard existence at all, but it is definitely alive. It's more alive than you are, because life itself is only a means and a measure in order for it to get what it wants, and all it wants to do is exist, right? So if you were to kinetically look at everything in its environment, it's what survives. I believe that it brings about mushrooms and frogs and all the things that we see that sort of replant themselves as base life and unfold this genetic potential. And I don't think it's any accident that Michael Levin was looking at the cells of bullfrog embryos and manipulating that. Because at its base, it is God. It can exist throughout space. It can reassert itself oxygenless. It can survive without direct sunlight. It can breed life in the depths of the waters and in the highest atmospheric conditions. It can somehow survive. And it exists on such a primal scale that when we look at research and studies where we share, 30+% of our DNA with yeast, we share something like 70-something% of our genetic predisposition with banana, And then when you get even closer and you're looking at nearly indistinguishable measures, it just comes down to another harmonic and cymatic inference with chromosomes, right? Where it's like how does one thing end up here? Because it uses those and our consciousness itself that we prize, and the fact that we prize it is that chiral asymmetrical refraction, is the fact that that's what we want to get more of. That's how we're manipulated. And so absolute power doesn't exist there. How do we access it? The scary thing is that this is where the master morality and the slave morality comes into play. The very disquieting aspect of it is the fact that it exists on the strings of what we can only call sexual energy. It's the true communication that happens when you look at occulted, again, visualizations and, you know, inverted pentagrams and all this stuff. Yes, it exists there. Yes, it is the ultimate evil. Yes, it will continue to exist. And no, you're not going to be able to just spray bleach on spores and get rid of it. It's there. It's always there. It's going to be there long after we die away, and it has the power to bring us back in a physical sense, to modify what and who we are. It's nothing to it. And it doesn't even exist in this all-powerful realm or place, but it does. It is a contagion that can work itself into the animal kingdom, abolish powers, mechanisms of play, hierarchical understandings, because consciousness itself is a wing and an arm to it getting what it ultimately needs. And what it demands, what it requires, is that this matrix that can only be described through a very I'd say plant-like mechanism, but it is not a plant. It is a microscopic existent fibrage force that carries itself along through spores and slime molds, and the matrix, the connectivity of information and the conveyance of information is done rapidly and it doesn't have to wait. It is thought, it is measure, it is the amalgamation of the language that's expressed throughout cave paintings, throughout antiquity, and the only time that we are in alignment with this, because of how we're built, and this is the scary thing, is through the manipulation. It's like a rat with cocaine water, you know, and it's going to go back to that water. But what they've found more recently is when the rat is given everything that it requires, is that the rat doesn't go toward the cocaine. It's only when something is taken out and the very best that it can do for itself in its environment, it will choose whatever brings it energy, you know. And so this is where there's been a lot of manipulation with these studies, is that we all choose a very pure way of living, a very pure discourse, but in order for it to get what it wants, right? If we were positive, if we were somehow able to influence it, and in effect, through the pure absolution of discourse and understanding, as to say that all our moral, ethical, and virtuous conjecture that we interplayed in this pure sort of way that we all want to pretend that we live under and that we hold in such esteem in this hierarchical sort of way, if that gave the thing nourishment, if that gave the thing food, if that fed it, right? But what happens is it produces more resources, it grows more, right? It lives with more attrition, more attributable progress in taking over everything, right? The matrix of everything lives on what we would consider on a sub level that we look past all the time, and that the plant kingdom, insects, the thing that exists on a micro scale, those things are being used and accessed in such a way that supply this entity. And we call it entity because I really do believe that, and Nathaniel Gills is onto something, at least with this specific thing, where it is a singular shared consciousness. But you have to get into the fact that human consciousness is a detail of expression. It is not the root. It is not sitting at the center of it's not at the center of the performance of the access system that you have to follow in through these bizarre trails that are very Lovecraft based. I mean, all too Lovecraft. Like, you're talking about spores, you're talking about slime molds, you're talking about a communication on a level that we should be looking a lot closer at and taking a lot more seriously.